Hi students, today let us learn about fertilization. Before going into fertilization, let us learn a little bit about plant reproduction. Reproduction in plants can be categorized into two. Number one, sexual reproduction. Number two, asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is otherwise called vegetative reproduction. Let's see what is sexual reproduction. The formation of new plant through the fusion of male gamete and female gamete is called sexual reproduction. What is sexual reproduction? The formation of new plant through the fusion of male gamete and female gamete is called sexual reproduction. Now in sexual reproduction, there are three major steps. Sexual reproduction involves three major steps. Number one, pollination. Number two, fertilization. Number three, fruit and seed formation. What is pollination? The process of transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma is called pollination. The process of transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma is called pollination. We learned in pollination, pollen grains are transferred from the anther to the stigma. What is this pollen grain? Pollen grain is a single cell male gametophyte. Pollen grain is a single cell male gametophyte which contain two male gametes. Both the male gametes are involved in fertilization. After the fertilization, zygote and endosperm is formed. After fertilization, zygote and endosperm is formed. So what is pollen grain? Pollen grain is a single cell male gametophyte which contain two male gametes. Both the male gametes are involved in fertilization. After the fertilization, zygote and endosperm is formed. This is how a pollen grain looks. Pollen grain has two layers. The outermost layer is called exine. Then the inner layer is called intine. Then there are three vacuoles. Vacuole. Then there is cytoplasm. Okay, there is cytoplasm. Here this is genitative cell. Genitative cell which has genitative nucleus. Genitative nucleus. Then here vegetative nucleus. This is called vegetative nucleus. Then there is one opening. This opening called germ pore. Germ, germ, pore, pore. This opening is called germ pore. I think almost we finished everything. Once again, this is how a pollen grain looks. The outer layer is called exine. The inner layer is called intine. Then there are three vacuoles here. Vacuole. Then cytoplasm is there. Then comes genitative cell, which has genitative nucleus. This is genitative nucleus. Then here vegetative nucleus. Then there is an opening that is called germ pore. I want all of you to pay attention here. This is how a pollen grain looks after pollination. The outer layer is called exine, the inner layer is called intine. Then there is a cytoplasm, there is cytoplasm inside, and then there are vacuoles, there are three vacuoles in that, and then genitative cell which has genitative nucleus. Then there is a vegetative nucleus. Then after pollination, the pollen grain, after coming to the stigma, the pollen grain starts germinating a tube that is called pollen tube. Pollen grain has two male gametes in it. The pollen tube carry those two male gametes to the female gamete. That is the function of the pollen tube. Then there is a tube nucleus which helps the pollen tube to grow and direct to the ovule. That is the function of this tube nucleus. Then there is an opening in the pollen grain here. There is an opening called germ pore. I want you to pay attention here. This is the female reproductive organ of a flower. This is stigma. This is stigma, and this tube is style, and then the outside, this bulged out part, the outside part is ovary, inside there is ovule. After pollination, you know that from the anther pollen grains transfers to the stigma. That process is called pollination. Once pollination takes place, after that this pollen grain starts germinating a tube which is called pollen tube. This tube is called pollen tube. Now why this pollen tube is there? Why it is germinating a pollen tube? Because there are two male gametes in the pollen grain. That male gamete has to reach to the female gamete. How it reaches? This pollen tube carry those two male gametes. There are two male gametes in the pollen grain. This pollen tube will help the male gametes to reach the female gamete. That is the function of this pollen tube. Now I said there are two male gametes. This male gametes is carried by this pollen tube. This pollen tube carry those male gametes to the ovule through an opening. There is an opening. This opening called micropyle. M-I-C-R-O-P-Y-L-E. Micropyle. This pollen tube carry those two male gametes through an opening to the ovule. This opening called micropyle. The process of carrying these two male gametes through this opening is called porogamy. Once it reaches inside the ovule, this tube penetrates and then this male gamete, one male gamete goes to this egg which is here and fuses with this egg and form zygote. That process is called syngamy. Now there are two male gametes I said. One male gamete is fused with the egg and that process is called syngamy, and after fusion that forms zygote. Okay. Then there is one more male gamete is remaining. One male gamete fuses with the egg. The other male gametes goes to this. There are two polar nuclei. This other male gamete, one already fused, then second one goes to these two polar nuclei and fuses with this and form endosperm. These are the two polar nuclei. With these two polar nuclei, the other male gamete fuses with and form endosperm. That process is called triple fusion. This endosperm contains carbohydrate, protein and lipids. This endosperm nourishes the zygote. Zygote divides into embryo. Embryo again give rise to plumule and radicle of a seed. Once again, there are two polar nuclei here. After fusion, one male gamete fuses with the egg here with the female gamete. Then there is remaining one male gamete. That male gamete fuses with these two polar nuclei. That process is called triple fusion. After fusion, it forms endosperm. This endosperm contains carbohydrate, protein and lipids. This endosperm's function is to nourish the zygote, and this zygote develops and divides into embryo. Embryo again give rise to plumule and radicle of a seed. Then there is a tube nucleus. Here. This tube nucleus helps this pollen tube to grow and then helps the tube to reach the ovule. That directs this tube nucleus directs the tube to the ovule. That is the function of tube nucleus. Now we'll see post-fertilization changes, or after fertilization what changes takes place in a flower. That is what we are going to see. Here is stigma, then comes style, ovary, inside ovary, ovule. Then there is a filament and then anther. In the anther there are pollen grains. Then comes petal, then there is sepals. After the fertilization, sepals will fall off, petals will fall off, the stamen, anther and filament together called stamen, that also will fall off. Stigma will fall off, style also will fall off. Then remaining ovary and ovule. This ovary turns to fruit ovule turns to seed. That is, the changes takes place after fertilization. Once again, after fertilization, what changes takes place in a flower? We learned parts of flower, that is sepal, petal, stamen, and then carpel. Okay. Now here, after fertilization, sepals will fall off, petals fall off, stamen, that is anther and filament together called stamen, that also fall off. Then carpel parts, that is stigma, style, ovary, and then ovule. From this carpel, stigma and style will fall off. The remaining ovary grows and turns to fruit. Then inside the ovule turns to seed. That is what the changes takes place in the flower after fertilization. If you like my video, please like, share and subscribe. Press the bell icon to stay tuned.